The unexpected encounter. Captain Ryan Hayes had been on countless missions before, but none quite like this one. He was deep behind enemy lines, leading his small squad of soldiers on a dangerous mission into alien territory. The war between humanity and the alien Zorth Empire had been raging for years, and Ryan knew every inch of this battlefield. He had faced alien soldiers, terrifying creatures, and deadly traps. But today, he stumbled upon something he never expected. The sun was setting over the rugged terrain, casting long shadows across the battlefield. Ryan's squad had been moving through a dense forest, careful to stay hidden. The air was thick with tension, and the distant sounds of battle echoed in the distance. Ryan scanned the area with his sharp eyes, looking for any signs of movement. His team had split up to cover more ground, but he was always on alert. The mission was clear: gather intelligence on a secret alien base hidden deep in the forest. They weren't supposed to engage, just observe and report. As Ryan moved quietly through the undergrowth, something caught his attention. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, a soft rustling sound. He paused, crouching low, his rifle ready. His heart raced, but his mind remained calm. Years of training kicked in as he slowly made his way toward the sound, careful not to make a single noise. The forest was eerily silent, the kind of silence that made every little sound seem louder. Ryan's instincts told him something was wrong. He crept closer, pushing aside the thick branches. What he saw next made him stop in his tracks. There, hidden in the shadows, was an alien woman. She was different from the Zorth soldiers he had fought before. Her skin was pale blue, and her long silver hair shimmered in the fading light. Her large violet eyes were wide with fear as she crouched against a tree, trying to make herself as small as possible. She wore a simple white gown, unlike the heavy armor of the Zorth warriors. She looked fragile, almost human, and completely out of place on a battlefield. Ryan's first instinct was to raise his weapon. She was an alien, and in this war, that meant she was the enemy. But something made him pause. She wasn't armed, and she didn't look like a soldier. In fact, she looked terrified. She didn't notice him at first, too focused on whatever had frightened her. Ryan slowly lowered his rifle, watching her closely. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the trees. Ryan's sharp ears picked up the sound of heavy boots. Alien soldiers were nearby. The woman's head snapped up, and her eyes locked onto Ryan. For a moment, they just stared at each other. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and desperation. Ryan realized that she wasn't just hiding from the war. She was being hunted. Without thinking, Ryan made a decision that could cost him everything. He stepped forward, motioning for her to stay quiet. Her eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't make a sound. Ryan quickly scanned the area, spotting the source of the footsteps. A group of Zorth soldiers, searching the forest. They were getting closer, their weapons drawn, clearly looking for someone. Ryan knew he didn't have much time. He grabbed the alien woman's hand and pulled her into a nearby thicket, crouching down beside her. She stiffened at his touch but didn't resist. They both stayed perfectly still as the Zorth soldiers passed by, their alien language harsh and guttural as they barked orders to one another. Ryan held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The soldiers were only a few feet away, but they hadn't noticed them. After what felt like an eternity, the soldiers moved on, their footsteps fading into the distance. Ryan finally exhaled, relaxing his grip on the woman's hand. She looked at him in disbelief, clearly shocked that a human had just saved her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Who are you?" Ryan whispered, keeping his voice low in case the soldiers returned. He wasn't sure why he was helping her, but he couldn't turn back now. She was in danger, and something inside him told him he had to protect her. The alien woman hesitated, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She looked around, as if making sure they were truly alone, before finally speaking. Her voice was soft, musical, but filled with fear. I am Lyra," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am the princess of the Zorith Empire." Ryan blinked, trying to process what she had just said. A princess. That complicated things. If she was telling the truth, she wasn't just any alien. She was royalty. But that also meant she was valuable, a target for anyone who wanted to gain power in the Empire. "Why are they after you?" Ryan asked, his mind racing. This wasn't part of his mission, but he couldn't just leave her. Lyra looked down, her face clouded with fear and sadness. "My father, the Emperor, wants me dead. I know things that could ruin him. He sent them to kill me." Ryan clenched his fists. This war was brutal enough, but hunting down your own daughter. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. He had to make a choice, and fast. "Stay with me," Ryan said, his voice firm. "I'll get you out of here." Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes wide with surprise. She didn't know why this human would risk his life for her, but she had no other choice. Nodding, she followed him as they slipped deeper into the forest, the danger far from over. A fragile alliance. Captain Ryan Hayes led Princess Lyra deeper into the forest, keeping a tight grip on his rifle. His mind was racing. How had he gone from leading a mission against the Zorith Empire to protecting one of their own princesses? He glanced back at Lyra. She moved silently, but her fear was obvious. Her wide violet eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, and her hand shook as she clutched the cloak Ryan had given her. They had to keep moving. The Zorith soldiers were likely still searching for her, and Ryan knew they wouldn't stop until they found her. He couldn't shake the feeling that this mission had just become far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Protecting a princess in enemy territory. It was insane. But Ryan had made his choice. He couldn't leave her behind, not after seeing the fear in her eyes. As they continued through the dense forest, the silence between them grew heavy. Ryan could feel Lyra's uncertainty, and he couldn't blame her. After all, he was a human, her enemy, and yet he had saved her life. But why? Even he wasn't entirely sure. Finally, after what felt like hours of running, they reached a small clearing. It was surrounded by thick trees and bushes, offering some cover. Ryan motioned for Lyra to stop, and they both crouched down, catching their breath. He scanned the area, making sure they were safe for the moment. Lyra looked at him, her face still pale with fear, but there was something else in her eyes now. Confusion. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. Ryan met her gaze, unsure of how to explain. "Because it was the right thing to do," he replied simply. He didn't know what else to say. In war, everything was supposed to be black and white, humanity against the aliens. But in that moment, when he saw her fear, the lines blurred. She wasn't just an enemy. She was someone in need. Lyra studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand. "My people, they wouldn't have helped you," she said, almost to herself. "They would have left you to die." Ryan sighed, resting his back against a tree. "I'm not like your people," he said. "Humans aren't like that. At least, not all of us." He glanced at her. "I couldn't just leave you." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their situation sinking in. Ryan could see that Lyra was still unsure of him, and he didn't blame her. Trust didn't come easily in times like these. As they sat in the clearing, the sounds of the forest filled the air, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, but Ryan knew that danger was never far away. They had to keep moving. The Zorith soldiers would be combing the area soon, and if they were found, there wouldn't be any mercy. "We can't stay here for long," Ryan said, standing up. "We need to keep moving." Lyra nodded, standing as well. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice laced with uncertainty. Ryan thought for a moment. His original mission was to gather intelligence, but that seemed irrelevant now. The priority was getting Lyra to safety. "There's an old bunker a few miles from here," he said. "It was abandoned after the first wave of attacks. It should be safe for now." Lyra hesitated, What if they find us there? Ryan looked at her, his expression serious. They won't, not if we're careful. He could see the doubt in her eyes, but there was no other option. They had to keep moving, or they'd be caught for sure. They set off again, moving through the forest as quietly as possible. Ryan led the way, using his military training to navigate the rough terrain. Every now and then, he would glance back at Lyra, making sure she was keeping up. She was quiet, but he could tell she was struggling. She wasn't used to running for her life, but she never complained, which surprised him. For a princess, she was tougher than he expected. As they moved deeper into the forest, Ryan's mind raced with questions. Why would the Emperor want his own daughter dead? What secrets did she know that made her a target? And more importantly, how was he going to keep her safe? The hours passed slowly, and with every step, the tension between them eased a little. Lyra still kept her distance, but there was a growing sense of trust between them. They both knew that, in this moment, they needed each other to survive. At one point, they stopped by a small stream to drink. Ryan took a moment to assess their surroundings, making sure there were no signs of the Zoreth soldiers. Lyra knelt by the water, her reflection rippling in the clear stream. She looked lost in thought, as if the weight of everything was finally hitting her. "I didn't think I'd ever have to run like this," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the water. "I was raised to be a ruler, not a fugitive." Ryan didn't respond at first. He wasn't sure what to say. Instead, he crouched beside her, cupping water in his hands and drinking. "Sometimes life doesn't go the way we expect," he said after a while. "We just have to keep moving forward." Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes searching his face. "How do you stay so calm?" she asked. "Aren't you afraid?" Ryan gave a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Of course I'm afraid," he said, "but fear doesn't help us survive. We have to stay focused, or we won't make it." Lyra nodded, her expression softening. For the first time, she seemed to understand what Ryan was trying to do. He wasn't just protecting her, he was trying to keep them both alive. As they prepared to continue their journey, a sudden noise broke the silence. The sound of footsteps, heavy, fast, and getting closer. Ryan's heart raced as he grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her into the cover of the trees. The Zoreth soldiers were back, and this time, they were closing in. The pursuit begins. Ryan's instincts kicked in immediately. He pulled Lyra into the dense trees, his heart pounding as the footsteps of the Zoreth soldiers grew louder. His grip tightened on his rifle, scanning the surroundings for any possible escape route. The enemy was close, too close. He could hear their guttural voices, barking commands as they moved swiftly through the forest, searching for their prey. "Stay low and don't make a sound," Ryan whispered urgently to Lyra. Her violet eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded, following his lead as they crouched behind a thick bush. They stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, as the Zoreth soldiers marched past them. There were at least 5 of them, heavily armed, their alien armor gleaming under the filtered light of the forest. Ryan could tell from their movement that they were trained hunters, tracking them with precision. He kept his hand steady on the trigger of his rifle, but he knew they couldn't fight. Not now. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The only chance they had was to escape unnoticed. Ryan could feel Lyra trembling beside him, her fear palpable. But she didn't move, trusting him to keep her safe. The soldiers slowed as they reached the clearing where Ryan and Lyra had been just moments before. They were close enough now that Ryan could hear their strange alien language. His mind raced, trying to think of a way to slip past them without being seen. The slightest movement could give them away, and one wrong step could be fatal. The leader of the Zoreth squad, a tall, menacing figure with dark, piercing eyes, barked an order, and the group fanned out, searching the area more thoroughly. Ryan cursed silently under his breath. They were looking for tracks, any sign of their movement. He knew they didn't have much time. If the soldiers picked up their trail, it would be over. "We need to move," Ryan whispered, barely audible. He glanced at Lyra, her pale blue face filled with anxiety, but she nodded. She was scared, but she wasn't helpless. There was a strength in her that Ryan hadn't seen before, a quiet determination to survive. Keeping as low as possible, Ryan gestured for her to follow him. They began to inch their way through the undergrowth, each step carefully placed to avoid making noise. Every crunch of a leaf or snap of a twig could be their undoing. Ryan's mind raced with every sound, his senses on high alert. The Zorath soldiers were still close, their search methodical and relentless. As they moved deeper into the forest, Ryan spotted a narrow path leading downhill, covered in thick vines and bushes. It was their best chance. He motioned to Lyra, and together they slipped down the path, moving quickly but cautiously. The forest grew denser, offering them more cover, but the terrain was rough, slowing their progress. The sound of the soldiers faded behind them, but Ryan knew better than to relax. The Zorath were skilled hunters. They wouldn't give up easily, especially not when they were after someone as valuable as a princess. Ryan could only imagine the reward for capturing Lyra, or worse, killing her. He shuddered at the thought. Protecting her was not only a matter of survival, it was becoming personal. He had made a promise to get her out of this alive, and he wasn't about to break it. As they pushed further into the forest, the ground became steeper, the trees thicker. Ryan's muscles ached from the constant strain, but he pushed on. He could feel Lyra struggling to keep up, her breath coming in short gasps, but she didn't complain. He admired her resilience. For someone who had likely never faced danger like this before, she was holding up remarkably well. They finally reached a small rocky outcrop overlooking a deep ravine. Ryan paused, scanning the area for any sign of pursuit. It seemed like they had lost the Zorath soldiers for now, but they couldn't be sure. He turned to Lyra, who was leaning against a tree, trying to catch her breath. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, keeping his voice low. She nodded, though she looked exhausted. Ryan knew they couldn't stop for long, but they needed a plan. "We can't keep running like this," Ryan said, thinking out loud. "They'll catch up eventually. We need to find a place to hide, somewhere they won't think to look." Lyra looked at him, her face pale and tired, but her eyes were sharp with focus. "There's an old temple," she said after a moment, her voice soft but steady. "It's hidden deep in the mountains, far from any military outpost. My people don't go there anymore. It's considered sacred, abandoned for centuries. They wouldn't think to search there." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "How far is it?" 2 days, maybe 3 if we're careful," she replied. "It's not easy to reach, but it's our best chance." Ryan considered this. It was risky, but staying out in the open was even more dangerous. If the temple was as hidden as she claimed, it might just buy them enough time to figure out their next move. He nodded, making his decision. "Then that's where we're going," Ryan said, determination hardening his voice. "But we need to move fast. Those soldiers won't stop until they find you." Lyra looked at him, gratitude flickering in her eyes, but there was something else too, hope. Despite everything, she was starting to trust him, and Ryan felt the weight of that trust on his shoulders. They set off again, moving toward the distant mountains. The forest began to thin out as they neared the rocky foothills, the air growing colder. The path ahead would be difficult, but Ryan was used to tough conditions. He just hoped Lyra could keep up. She had surprised him so far, but they were about to face even greater challenges. As night began to fall, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced over his shoulder, but the forest behind them was quiet, too quiet. The Zorath soldiers weren't far, and Ryan knew it was only a matter of time before the chase began again. But this time, he was ready. He would protect Lyra, no matter what it took. Because now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about something more. The ambush. Night had fully settled in, casting a cold, eerie silence over the mountains as Ryan and Lyra trekked through the rugged terrain. The wind howled softly, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine. They had been walking for hours, their bodies aching with fatigue, but there was no time to stop. The Zorath soldiers were relentless, and Ryan could feel them closing in, like shadows creeping in the darkness. "We should stop soon," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling slightly from exhaustion. Ryan glanced at her. She was doing better than he had expected, but even he knew they couldn't push much further without rest. Her royal upbringing hadn't prepared her for this kind of hardship, yet she refused to complain. Ryan nodded. "We'll rest for a few hours, but not here. It's too open." He scanned the area, his military instincts guiding him. "We need higher ground, someplace we can defend if we're found." As they climbed a rocky ridge, Ryan's eyes caught something in the distance, a small cave tucked into the side of the mountain, barely visible under the moonlight. It wasn't much, but it would offer them some shelter and a better vantage point to spot anyone approaching. He gestured to Lyra, and they made their way toward it. The cave was shallow, just deep enough to provide cover from the wind. Ryan quickly checked the area, making sure it wasn't already occupied by any unwanted wildlife. Satisfied, he motioned for Lyra to sit and rest, while he kept watch at the entrance. Lyra sat down heavily on the cold stone floor, pulling her cloak tightly around her. "How much farther do you think the temple is?" she asked softly, her eyes searching the dark horizon. "Maybe another day's walk, if we're lucky," Ryan replied, keeping his voice low. "We're close, but the terrain will get tougher. And the Zorath, they're not far behind." Lyra's expression darkened. "They won't stop, will they?" "Not until." Her voice trailed off, and Ryan knew what she was thinking. The Zorath wouldn't stop until they had captured her, or worse. "No," Ryan said firmly, turning to face her. "But they won't get to you. I won't let that happen." Lyra looked at him, her violet eyes reflecting both fear and a glimmer of hope. "Why are you doing this, Ryan? You could have left me back there. You could have run, saved yourself." Ryan paused, unsure how to answer. It wasn't just about duty anymore. Somewhere along the way, something had changed. He had begun to see Lyra not as a mission or a responsibility, but as a person, someone who needed him. And maybe, just maybe, he needed her too. Before he could respond, a sound broke through the stillness, a faint rustling in the bushes below the ridge. Ryan's hand instinctively went to his rifle, his body tensing. He held up a hand to silence Lyra, who had heard it too. They weren't alone. Ryan crouched low, moving silently to the edge of the cave entrance. He peered over the ridge, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows below. At first, he saw nothing but the dark outlines of trees and rocks, but then a flicker of movement caught his attention. A group of figures, silent, swift, and deadly, moving through the underbrush. "Zorath soldiers. They found us," Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. His heart raced, but his mind stayed calm. Years of training had prepared him for situations like this. "Stay back, and don't make a sound," he instructed Lyra, who nodded, her face pale. Ryan watched as the soldiers spread out, surrounding the base of the ridge. They were moving with military precision, their black armor blending into the night. He counted 6 of them, all heavily armed. They didn't know exactly where he and Lyra were yet, but it wouldn't take long before they discovered the cave. Ryan gripped his rifle tightly, his mind racing through his options. They couldn't outrun them now. There were too many, and the terrain was too steep. Their only chance was to fight, but with Lyra by his side, the odds were slim. Still, Ryan wasn't about to let them take her without a fight. He glanced at Lyra, who was crouched behind a rock, her eyes wide with fear, but also determination. She was trusting him, relying on him. Ryan felt a surge of resolve. "I'll create a diversion," Ryan whispered. "When they're distracted, you run. Head up the ridge toward the temple. Don't look back." Lyra's eyes widened. "No, I won't leave you." "You have to," Ryan interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "If they capture you, Everything's over. You're the one they're after, not me. I'll be right behind you. I promise." Lyra hesitated, but she knew he was right. She nodded slowly, her face tight with worry. "Be careful," she whispered. Ryan gave her a small, reassuring nod before turning his attention back to the soldiers below. He had to act fast. The Zorath were closing in, their movements growing more deliberate as they neared the cave. Taking a deep breath, Ryan shifted his position, staying low. He aimed his rifle at a cluster of trees just off to the side of the approaching soldiers. With precise timing, he fired a single shot. The crack of the gun echoed through the mountains, and the bullet hit its mark, sending a burst of leaves into the air. The Zorath soldiers reacted instantly, their heads snapping toward the sound. They moved quickly, diverting toward the disturbance. Ryan took advantage of the chaos, firing again from a different angle to keep them off balance. "Now," he whispered sharply to Lyra. Without hesitation, Lyra darted from her hiding spot, moving as quickly and quietly as she could up the ridge. Ryan kept his focus on the soldiers, providing cover fire to keep their attention away from her. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins as he expertly picked off targets, slowing the enemy's advance. But the Zorath were skilled fighters, and it didn't take long for them to realize what was happening. Ryan saw their leader bark an order, and two soldiers broke off from the group, heading toward the ridge, toward Lyra. "No," Ryan muttered under his breath. He couldn't let them reach her. Without thinking, he leaped from his position, charging down the ridge toward the soldiers. The element of surprise was on his side, and Ryan took down the first soldier with a well-aimed shot to the chest. The second turned to fire, but Ryan was quicker, rolling to the side and firing again. The soldier crumpled to the ground. Breathing hard, Ryan glanced up the ridge to see Lyra disappearing into the trees, safe for now. Relief washed over him, but he didn't have time to celebrate. The remaining Zorath soldiers were closing in fast, and he was running out of options. Ryan took a deep breath, steeling himself. He had bought Lyra some time, but now he had to survive long enough to keep his promise. A desperate escape. Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears as he sprinted up the ridge, his heart racing with the weight of what was at stake. He could still hear the distant footsteps of the Zorath soldiers below, the relentless hunters moving closer with every second. The night was their ally, but Ryan's training kicked in, keeping him sharp and alert. He couldn't afford to slip, not now. Lyra's life depended on him. High above, the sky was a blanket of stars, but there was no peace in the beauty of the night. Each step felt heavier than the last as Ryan forced his exhausted body to keep going, his mind replaying the image of Lyra's terrified face as she ran. She was his responsibility. He had to reach her before the Zorath did. Lyra had made it further up the mountain, moving swiftly through the rocky terrain. Despite her exhaustion, her determination drove her forward. She was no longer the helpless princess from before. She had become a survivor, hardened by the reality of their situation. But even she knew she couldn't outrun them forever. Ryan heard the crackle of a communication device behind him. Zorath reinforcements. His gut twisted. They were closing in from all directions. He had managed to slow them down with the ambush, but it wouldn't last. He needed to find a way to lead Lyra to safety before they were completely surrounded. As he reached a steep ledge, Ryan paused to catch his breath, his sharp eyes scanning the dark landscape below. He could see the faint flicker of movement, more soldiers crawling up the mountain like a dark wave. They were too many. He tapped his comm, hoping the signal would get through. "Lyra, can you hear me?" His voice was calm despite the rising panic in his chest. There was a moment of static, then her voice crackled through, soft and strained. "Yes, I'm here. I don't know where to go." "Stay calm," Ryan said, his mind racing. "I'm coming to you. Keep heading up the ridge. There's a river ahead. Follow it." "But the soldiers, they're everywhere." "I know," Ryan said, glancing back down at the soldiers gaining on him. "Just trust me. I'll get you out of this." He disconnected the comm, his mind working through every possible scenario. The river was their only chance. It could hide their tracks, maybe even carry them far enough from the Zoreth that they could slip away. But they'd have to move fast. Time was running out. Ryan climbed further, each movement deliberate and careful, his boots gripping the rough stones as he made his way toward Lyra's last known position. His muscles ached, but his mind was focused, clear. He wouldn't let her down. Not now. Minutes passed like hours until Ryan spotted a small figure moving in the shadows ahead. It was Lyra, scrambling over a boulder. She looked over her shoulder, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide with fear as the sounds of approaching soldiers echoed through the night. "Ryan," she gasped when she saw him. "Keep moving," Ryan urged, his voice low but commanding. "We're almost there." Lyra nodded, and they pressed on together, the steep incline forcing them to slow. Ryan's ears strained for any sign of the enemy, and it wasn't long before he heard the unmistakable sound of boots on gravel, too close for comfort. "They're right behind us," Lyra whispered, panic rising in her voice. Ryan cursed under his breath. They didn't have much time. The river was close, but the Zoreth were closer. He quickly glanced around, searching for anything they could use to buy some time. Something, anything, that would give them a chance to disappear. That's when he saw it, a narrow rock bridge jutting out over a deep ravine. On the other side, the land sloped down toward the river, hidden by the thick trees. It was risky, but it was their best shot. "Follow me," Ryan ordered, pointing to the rock bridge. Lyra hesitated when she saw how precarious the crossing looked. "Ryan, that's—" "I know it's dangerous," he said quickly, "but we don't have a choice. The river's on the other side. Once we cross, we'll lose them in the trees." She looked at him, fear and trust battling in her eyes, but she nodded. Together, they moved toward the narrow ledge, the sound of the Zoreth soldiers drawing ever closer. The wind howled as they approached the bridge, its thin surface barely wide enough for one person at a time. Ryan went first, stepping carefully onto the narrow path, his eyes never leaving the uneven stone beneath his feet. His heart hammered in his chest, each step sending tiny pebbles skittering off the edge into the blackness below. One wrong move, and they'd fall. Behind him, Lyra followed, her movements cautious but steady. Ryan kept glancing back, urging her on, until they were halfway across. He could hear the Zoreth soldiers now. Close, too close. Suddenly, a shot rang out, and Ryan instinctively ducked. A laser blast struck the stone wall near his head, sending shards of rock flying. The soldiers had found them. "Go," Ryan shouted, waving Lyra forward as more shots cracked through the night air. Lyra ran the rest of the way across the bridge, her fear pushing her faster than before. Ryan stayed behind, firing his rifle toward the approaching soldiers, keeping them at bay for as long as he could. But the Zoreth were relentless, and more blasts whizzed past him, one of them grazing his arm. He hissed in pain but kept moving, his body fueled by adrenaline. As soon as he was across the bridge, Ryan turned and fired a single, precise shot at the narrow rock base of the bridge. The explosion sent a rumble through the mountain, and the bridge crumbled, falling into the abyss below, cutting off their pursuers. Panting, Ryan turned to Lyra, who stood wide-eyed on the other side. "We need to keep going," he said, his voice strained but urgent. Lyra nodded, and they ran, the sound of the rushing river growing louder in the distance. The Zoreth might have lost the bridge, but Ryan knew they wouldn't stop. The chase was far from over. The river lay ahead, its swift current offering both salvation and danger. Ryan knew that crossing it would be their best chance to escape, but it would also be the hardest challenge yet. Their desperate escape had only just begun. The fight was far from over. Into the river's grip. The river roared ahead, its dark waters crashing over jagged rocks as Ryan and Lyra stumbled down the steep hillside. The wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it the distant shouts of the Zoreth soldiers, still in pursuit. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the situation pressing on him like never before. He had managed to delay the enemy by collapsing the rock bridge, but it wouldn't hold them off forever. The Zorath were relentless, and Ryan knew they'd find another way across soon. The river was their only hope now, but the sight of its violent currents made even him hesitate. Lyra stood beside him, her chest heaving from the exhausting run, eyes wide as she looked at the torrent below. She wiped her brow, her breathing still labored from the climb down the mountainside. We have to cross that?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. Ryan glanced at her, understanding the fear in her eyes. "It's the only way," he said. "If we stay on this side, they'll catch us." "But it's too strong," she muttered, her gaze fixed on the crashing waves. "We'll be swept away." Ryan could see she was right. The river was wild, more dangerous than he had expected, but it was also their best chance to lose the Zorath soldiers. They had to take the risk. "We don't have a choice," Ryan said firmly. "The current will take us downstream, away from them. We just need to hold on and stay together." Lyra looked at him, her fear evident, but there was something else in her eyes. Trust. She nodded, swallowing her fear. "Okay, let's do it." Ryan quickly removed some of the heavier gear from his back, knowing it would only drag him down in the water. He handed a small length of rope to Lyra. "Tie this around your waist. I'll hold the other end. If we get separated, we'll still be connected." Lyra fumbled with the rope, her hands shaking slightly, but she secured it tightly around her waist, just as Ryan did. The roar of the river seemed to grow louder as they approached, the water's cold mist hitting their faces. Ryan gave Lyra a reassuring nod before taking a deep breath. "On my signal, we jump." She clenched her fists, her fear pushing her to the edge, but she stayed strong. Together, they inched closer to the water's edge, the waves lapping at their feet. 1, 2, 3, Ryan shouted, and with that, they both leaped into the icy river. The current hit them like a wall, knocking the air from Ryan's lungs. The freezing water surged around them, pulling them under for a moment before they broke the surface, gasping for breath. Ryan immediately tightened his grip on the rope, keeping Lyra close as they were swept downstream. The river was relentless, dragging them along like leaves caught in a storm. Ryan fought to keep his head above water, his arms flailing against the pull of the current. He could hear Lyra struggling beside him, but the rope between them held strong, keeping them tethered together. For a few terrifying moments, Ryan was certain they wouldn't make it. The river was too fast, too powerful. But then he saw a small outcropping of rocks ahead, a narrow space where the river slowed slightly. If they could reach it, they might have a chance to rest and catch their breath. "Hold on," Ryan yelled over the roar of the water. "We're almost there." Lyra didn't respond, but he could see her fighting the current with everything she had, her eyes wide with determination. Inch by inch, they were pulled toward the outcropping. Ryan reached out, his fingers scraping against the rough rocks as the current tried to pull him away. With a final burst of strength, he grabbed hold of the rocks, gripping them tightly. He felt the rope tug as Lyra was pulled closer, and he extended his arm toward her. "Take my hand," he shouted. Lyra's hand shot out, and Ryan grasped it firmly, pulling her toward the safety of the rocks. Together, they climbed onto the small outcropping, collapsing in exhaustion as the river raged around them. For a few moments, all they could do was lie there, gasping for breath, the cold water still lapping at their feet. The weight of the escape, the chase, the relentless pursuit of the Zorath, it all pressed down on them in the silence of that moment. "We made it," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the river. Ryan nodded, still panting. "Yeah, for now." He scanned the surrounding area, realizing they weren't safe yet. The Zorath soldiers were likely still on the other side of the river, searching for a way to cross. But they had gained precious time. The river had given them a head start. "We need to keep moving," Ryan said, pushing himself to his feet despite the aching in his muscles. "They'll be looking for us." Lyra, still catching her breath, nodded and slowly stood as well. "Which way?" Ryan pointed downstream. "We follow the river for a while, then head back into the forest. It'll be harder for them to track us that way." They began walking along the rocky shore, their clothes still soaked and heavy from the river, but their spirits were lifted. The escape had worked, at least for now. The river had been a gamble, but it had paid off. As they walked in silence, Ryan glanced at Lyra. Despite everything, the danger, the fear, she had stayed strong. She was no longer the frightened princess he had first met. She had proven herself, time and again, to be brave, resilient, and determined. "We're going to make it," Ryan said quietly, more to himself than to her. "We're going to survive this." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I believe you." But deep down, Ryan knew the hardest part of their journey was still ahead. The Zorath wouldn't stop until they were captured or dead. For now, though, they had survived the river. And that was enough. "You said." The final stand. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows through the dense forest as Ryan and Lyra made their way deeper into the wilderness. The forest stretched out endlessly in every direction, its thick canopy hiding them from the relentless pursuit of the Zorath soldiers. The sound of the river had long faded behind them, but the weight of the chase still pressed down on them both. Ryan kept his pace steady, glancing back at Lyra every so often. She was exhausted, her steps faltering, but she refused to stop. Her once elegant dress was now torn and dirtied, and her face was streaked with mud. But there was a fire in her eyes, one that had grown brighter with each passing challenge. "We're close," Ryan said, his voice low but encouraging. "Just a little further. There's a cave up ahead. It'll give us some cover for the night." Lyra nodded, though she didn't speak. She had pushed herself to the limit, and Ryan admired her strength. She wasn't the pampered princess he had expected when they first met. She had become a survivor. As they continued through the trees, the forest began to change. The ground rose into a rocky incline, and the trees became sparse, revealing jagged cliffs ahead. In the distance, Ryan spotted the dark entrance of the cave he had mentioned. It wasn't much, but it would give them shelter, at least for a few hours. "We'll rest here," Ryan said as they approached the cave. "It's not safe to move through the forest at night. They'll have patrols looking for us." Lyra nodded again, her relief visible as she collapsed onto the rocky ground just inside the cave. She leaned back against the cool stone, closing her eyes for a moment. Ryan took a deep breath, stepping outside to scan the surrounding area. His instincts told him they weren't safe yet. The Zorath soldiers were too close. As he stood at the cave's entrance, Ryan's sharp hearing caught the faint sound of footsteps, distant, but getting closer. His heart sank. The Zorath were here. They had found them. Without hesitation, Ryan rushed back inside the cave. "Lyra, get up," he whispered urgently, shaking her gently. "They've found us." Lyra's eyes snapped open, the exhaustion in her body replaced by sudden fear. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ryan didn't hesitate. "We fight." He had known this moment would come. They had been running for days, evading capture, but it was clear now that the Zorath soldiers wouldn't stop until they had them both. Ryan unslung the rifle from his back, checking its charge. He had a few shots left, enough for a final stand. Lyra stood beside him, her body tense but resolute. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Ryan glanced at her, surprised by her determination. "Stay behind me. Let me handle them." But before Lyra could respond, the sound of the Zorath soldiers grew louder. Ryan stepped forward, positioning himself just inside the cave's entrance, using the rocks as cover. He could see the first of the Zorath soldiers moving through the trees, their armor glinting in the fading light. Ryan's finger tightened on the trigger as the first soldier came into view. He fired, the shot hitting its mark. The soldier crumpled to the ground, but the others didn't hesitate. They charged forward, their weapons raised. The fight was brutal and fast. Ryan fired off shot after shot, taking down several soldiers, but they kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. His pulse raced as he ducked behind a rock to reload, glancing back at Lyra, who stood against the cave wall, her eyes wide with fear, but her stance firm. "Ryan," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. He turned just in time to see a Zorath soldier rushing toward him, sword raised. Ryan dodged the blow, barely avoiding the sharp blade as it struck the rock beside him. With a swift movement, Ryan drove his elbow into the soldier's throat, knocking him back before delivering a final shot. But there were too many of them. Ryan's body ached from the fight, and his energy was fading. The soldiers closed in, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. Suddenly, a powerful blast echoed through the cave, stopping the soldiers in their tracks. Ryan spun around, his heart pounding. Lyra stood there, holding one of the Zorath rifles she had picked up from a fallen soldier. Her eyes were fierce, filled with a determination that Ryan had never seen before. "I won't let them take you," she said, her voice steady. The Zorath soldiers hesitated, caught off guard by the princess's defiance. In that moment of hesitation, Ryan acted. He charged forward, using the last of his strength to push through the enemy lines, taking down soldier after soldier with brutal efficiency. Lyra fired alongside him, her aim surprisingly precise. Together, they fought as one, each protecting the other. The Zorath soldiers, though highly trained, weren't prepared for the sheer willpower of Ryan and Lyra. One by one, they fell, until the forest was silent once more. Ryan stood at the entrance of the cave, his body bruised and battered, but alive. He looked back at Lyra, who was breathing heavily, her hands still gripping the rifle. She had fought beside him, risking everything to survive. The sun had fully set now, casting the world into darkness. But in that moment, Ryan knew they had won. They had survived against all odds. "Is it over?" Lyra asked quietly, stepping forward, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Ryan nodded, his exhaustion finally catching up to him. "For now. But we need to move. They'll send more." Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting the determination she had found within herself during their escape. "Then we'll keep fighting," she said, her voice firm. Ryan smiled, despite the pain in his body. "Yeah, we'll keep fighting." As they began to move deeper into the forest, Ryan knew one thing for certain. They had become more than just allies. In their struggle to survive, they had found something stronger than fear, something that would carry them through whatever dangers lay ahead. Together, they would face whatever the galaxy threw at them. And together, they would survive.